Well, welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. We have been working our way for quite a while, actually now, but we've been working our way through the book of Genesis. Genesis is one of those foundational books. It's got all the foundational theology and doctrine. It teaches us a lot about who God is, who man is meant to be, that we were created in God's image originally. And it's the beginnings of his working out of a lot of his plan. Now, his plan has been purposed from eternity past, but through Genesis we start to see the beginnings of things. We see in the life of Abraham as God starts to call an individual out, and he is going to expand his promises and his blessings to his children, and eventually we're going to get to the point where we have the nation of Israel. And the nation of Israel is meant to be a vehicle. It's meant to be the tool, the instrument that God uses to bring about the Messiah, the Christ, the one who is to come, who is going to reconcile, who's going to redeem, who's going to bring man back into that relationship that was lost in the garden and then following as Adam and Eve sinned, and we follow in their footsteps, and we've sinned against a holy God. So Genesis is very foundational. It's very important. And so we're up to chapter 31 today, chapter 31. So grab your Bible and turn to Genesis chapter 31. Now we're going to look at verses 1 through 3 to begin. So Genesis chapter 31, looking at verses 1 through 3, says this. It says, "Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has gained his wealth. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. And the Lord said to Jacob, Return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I'll be with you." All right, so what we see here in these first few verses is really the setting up of what's to happen. So Jacob has been in Padan Aram. He's been in the Haran area for a very long time now. He's been away from the promised land. He's been away from his immediate family, his father, his mother. And it's been approximately something around 20 years that he has been away. And now he served Laban for quite a number of years in order to get his wives, and he's served him more years in order to get his livestock, his flocks, and so his wealth. And Jacob is at the point in his life now where things are going to change. Things are going to radically start to change once more in his life. There's going to be a transition. This is a transition period now. And he's decided that he's been here long enough, it's time to go. Now, you'll remember back in chapter 30 that Jacob had wanted to head out already. He had enough. He was ready to leave and go home, but Laban worked his magic, and he talked to him and offered him whatever he wanted for his wages in order to stay. So Jacob stayed an additional number of years. But he's ready. He's ready to go back home. And we find some things in verses 1 through 3. What do we find? Well, we find that Jacob recognizes that it's time to leave. This isn't just a slight feeling. There's some things that are going on where he knows, I have to leave. I have to go back home now. Now, we might want to ask, what are the things that let him know? What's transpiring? What's going on in Jacob's life and those around Jacob that let him know that it's really time to leave now? He can't stay any longer. Well, the first thing is Laban's sons. They're all bad-mouthing him. They're all talking about Jacob, right? They're saying that he's really stolen their father's wealth. Now remember, Jacob is being blessed by God. He is becoming a very wealthy man. He's becoming a man who has a lot of flocks. And of course, flocks equals wealth and servants and things like that. And the sons of Laban they're jealous, maybe envious, and they're recognizing that at least it appears that Jacob is gaining and their father is losing. And so they're bad-mouthing Jacob behind his back. He hears about it. And so that's part of what's going on, right? Who knows what these sons of Laban are capable of, or what they might want to do. So there might be something in the background there. Are they going to take matters into their own hand? Who knows? But that's one clue that it's time to leave. The second clue is that, according to verse 2, Laban no longer sees Jacob as a blessing. You know, it says that Jacob saw, in verse 2 it says, and Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. Their relationship has changed. Now again, this could probably be due to the fact that Jacob is gaining, and Laban may very well be losing some of his wealth, some of his livestock. And it may also be that he's got this nagging voice in the back of his head called his sons. You know, when you're around people that are always pointing out negative things and that are always trying to get you to see the bad in other people or the bad that's going on, it affects us. It affects us. Clearly, it affects us in different ways, but we can be persuaded to see things the way others see. So it could be that his sons, and very likely, I mean, these boys, I'm sure, if Jacob has found out about this, they're not quietly talking about Jacob behind his back. This is probably out in the open, and their father probably has heard a lot of it and has been exposed to it. So Laban no longer sees Jacob as a blessing. Their relationship is changing. And then third, and really the most important, is that God tells Jacob, it's time to go. God says, time to return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I'll be with you. Notice a couple things about what God says there. Return to the land of your fathers and your kindred. See, the land that he's in, even though Abraham came out of this, and that's where his distant relatives are from, Haran and Ur the Chaldees and all of these areas over there where he's at now, that's not his home. That's not his home. That's not his land. That's not the land of his fathers. So this isn't the place where he's meant to stay anyway. So that's important to notice. But God says it's time for you to return. And he says, I'm going to be with you. So there's a reassurance. You know, anytime there's big changes in someone's life, a lot of time there can be fear. There can be a caution where people are unsure. Should they make that next step? And, you know, moving, even if it's moving back home here, this is moving back home for Jacob. There's a lot that goes into this. He's lived in Padan Aram for around 20 years now. So he's made a home there, but it's time for him to leave. So God says, I'm going to be with you. Don't worry about it. I'm going to be with you. Now, again, there could be a lot of reasons why Jacob needs that. But here's the thing. I believe that God says to Jacob, I'll be with you, because Jacob needed to know. He needed an assurance that God was with him. So let's look at verses 4 through 16 now. So 4 through 16 says this. It says, so Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was, and said to them, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before. But the God of my father has been with me. You know that I served your father with all my strength. Yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not permit him to harm me. If he said, the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted. And if he said, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock bore striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and molted. And the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. And I said, here I am. And he said, lift up your eyes and see. All the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and molted. For I have seen what Laban is doing to you, all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now rise, go out from this land, and return to the land of your kindred. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, Is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God said to you, do. All right, so what does Jacob do first in these verses here, in the verses 4 through 16? Well, the first thing he does is he calls his wives to come out to him into the field, and he wants to talk with them. Now, of course, as we're reading through this, we want to ask some questions. One of the questions we want to ask is, why does he call them out to the field? Now, again, the text doesn't actually tell us, but it's good to contemplate and to think about why is a person doing what they're doing. And so it could be that he wants to hide what he plans on doing from other people. After all, a field where your flock are grazing and eating and all, that's a great place to be able to see if anyone else is around, right? Nobody else is going to be around. You're going to notice them coming from miles, right? So this is a great place, quiet place, maybe to get something sneaky done. Now, we know that Jacob has no problem hiding things from people, right? So, in times past, he's been a deceiver. Now, I think he's grown. He's grown a lot, but there's still moments in his life where I think we see the old Jacob popping through, and this might be one of those. That might be what's going on here. Now, of course, it might also be that he's just taking care of his flocks, and he gets a message from God in the midst of his taking care of the flock, and he wants to leave, and he can't just leave the flock alone, so he calls his wives to come out to him. That's possible too. He might need to call them out. Either way, Jacob is going to talk to these wives, and he's going to talk to them about what he's getting ready to do. Now, did you notice something? Did you notice in the text how many of his wives he called? Well, he only called two. He called Rachel and he called Leah. These are the free women. He doesn't talk to the other two wives. Very interesting. He's got 4 wives, right? This is another indication that those other wives are not considered equal to the free wives. There's something different. And we saw this a little bit earlier as well, where some wives who were taken in this fashion were called concubines later on in the text. Well, these other wives may very well have been called concubines as well. They were not the same as these free wives. So he calls those two, and of course he calls those two for another reason. That's because their father is Laban. But he doesn't call all his wives. That's important. He doesn't call all his wives. He calls the free wives. So there is a difference going on there. What's going on in verses 4 through 13? Well, Jacob is basically retelling what's happened to him over the years and how their father Laban doesn't see him as blessed anymore. Doesn't see him as a blessing to him. It doesn't recognize Jacob. He's telling him, your father has cheated me over and over again. He's changed my wages, but God is the one who has upheld his promise to bless me, and your father's flocks are decreasing and mine are increasing and all of that. So again, this goes back to why the boys were talking and what was going on with all this gossip, and Laban not recognizing, or I should say Laban recognizing that there's something going on here. My flocks, my sheep are going down in number and yours are going up. So that's problematic. Why does Jacob even mention this to these ladies? Do they not know everything that's been going on for the last 20 years? Have they not lived at least in close proximity to Jacob? I know they had their own tents. We saw that in a scene before. But of course they're around, right? Now he seems to be trying to convince them that they need to sneak away, that they need to head out. And he seems to be trying to get them on his side, right? If they don't want to leave, if they want to stay with their father, if they want to stay in this land, they could easily tell their father that Jacob plans to leave. That might cause a lot of trouble for Jacob. So Jacob is telling him his plans, but he's kind of reiterating, listen, your father's been mean. He has, he's been deceptive. He's tried to change things, but God's been on our side, right? He brings God in the picture. God has made us wealthy and taken away your father's wealth. And so even if they thought maybe that Jacob was stealing their father's wealth, Jacob points and says, no, God's the one who's taking wealth away from Laban. So, there could be a little bit of Jacob trying to shift any kind of blame that might be, looked at him as being the thief or something, kind of shifted towards God. Now, of course, God is the one in the midst of all of this. But it's interesting the way that Jacob says what he says. So he's looking to remind them of everything that's happened, and he's looking to convince them that they need to leave. He wants them on his side, it appears. So what do these two wives say in verses 14 through 16? Well, they basically say, we know who our father is, right? Our father has mistreated us as well. He sold us. He spent all that was ours. And they, of course, also make mention that all that God has blessed Jacob with is theirs as well. They don't kind of draw that out, but they basically say all the wealth that you have, yeah, that's ours and our children's as well. So these women are with Jacob, right? His wives are with him. They're ready to leave. Not much of a big deal going on there. Let's look at verses 17 through 24 now. So starting in 17 says, so Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock and all his property that he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Padan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan, to his father Isaac. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. And Jacob tricked Laban, the Aramean, by telling him that he intended, by not telling him that he intended to flee. He fled with all that he had and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. When it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsmen with him and pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Okay, so a number of things are happening in these verses. First, Jacob packs up and is ready to move on. He's packing up, he's getting out of there. And we find out that Jacob it says he tricked Laban in verse 20. Some of your other translations might say something a little different. The Hebrew there says that he stole the heart of. So he tricked Laban, whatever your translation might say in there. He's being deceptive. He's not telling him that he's leaving. He's just going to up and leave. Now, why doesn't he tell Laban? Why didn't he just tell Laban, listen, I'm done. I'm ready to head out. Well, Laban is a deceitful man and is wealthy, and he's well known. Now, he could cause problems or try and trick Jacob. Jacob has had enough of Laban, and he just wants to head out, right? He doesn't want to have any of this drama. He could be fearful, right? Jacob could be a bit fearful of either being attacked and maybe all his stuff taken away, or he could be fearful that he might get tricked into, kind of conned into staying and working and just having to be in that relationship. So he wants out, so he's not going to tell Laban. We also notice that one of Laban's daughters, Rachel, now this is inserted in here, one of Laban's daughters, Rachel, stole her father's household gods. Well, she's a chip off the old block, isn't she? Right? She's like her father. Her father is a thief. And she is. But what's the issue with these household gods? Why does Rachel even want them, right? Why is she taking them? What's going on with these household gods? Well, it's more. It's more than merely pagan worship. The household gods were proof of the headship of the family. Laban is the head of his family, and those gods prove it. You know, if a rival brother came along and wanted to contest Laban's right of headship, Laban couldn't provide that proof because the household gods are gone. So these household gods, more than just pagan worship, of course, there's part of that going on there, but there's more than that, right? In some ways, you can think of this kind of like a legal document. Like, I can produce these. I have the household gods. I am the head of the household. I am the head of the family. So these are important. Now, once Laban hears that Jacob's left, he gathers up a group of people and he goes after him. Why is Laban going after Jacob? It might be because he thinks that Jacob's stolen some of his wealth, right? I mean, that's been in the background of the talk from his sons, that, you know, he could be thinking, you have stolen from me, you're taking away a large portion of my wealth. At least while Jacob was living there, he might be able to trick him or deceive him or rob him blind of Jacob's, you know, sheep and flocks, things like that. Now that he's gone, well, his wealth could be gone as well, right? But he's probably much more concerned about his household gods. Remember, that's a big deal. So, and we're going to see that this comes up again in the rest of this chapter. So it seems that he's probably most upset about these household gods. Now, what happens with Laban as he's traveling out to meet up with Jacob? Well, Laban has a little visit from God. God comes along and he says to Laban, don't say anything, good or bad, to Jacob. You know, don't threaten him. Don't try to get, don't try to get tough with him or whatever. Watch yourself, right? God is basically saying, you better watch yourself, because this is my guy. I'm with him. He's with me, kind of thing. So you just be careful of what you say. So Laban gets a revelation from God. Well, let's leave it right there for this week. Very interesting period of time in the life of Jacob. We could call this period the escape from Padan Aram, as Jacob is trying to escape from Laban and from that area. So we'll stop there, and we will pick it up again, Lord willing, next week. God bless.